2 maps, 1 heart, and a highway of memories. Join me as I chase the man I almost lost mile by mile through towns that smell of coffee, rain, and second chances. It's a road trip stitched with hope, where every exit whispers his name and calls me home again. Hit subscribe, settle in, and let your heart ride shotgun as we drive toward forgiveness, truth, and the kindest love. The morning I left, a hush hung over the street like quilted fog. The old sycamore by the curb dropped a single leaf onto the hood of my dusty sedan, and it felt like a small blessing, a benediction that said, "Go on now." The neighbor's porch light blinked off. Somewhere, a coffee maker gurgled to life. I stood on the front steps with my thermos and a bag packed in a single deliberate hour, and I told the quiet truth out loud for the first time in months. I'm driving to him. His name is Evan. And if you've ever loved someone long enough to memorize the way their hand falls asleep in yours, you know a name like that becomes a map. It's the street you turn on without consulting the GPS. It's a favorite booth at the diner. It's a song that finds you in the cereal aisle. For me, Evan is the exit sign I keep missing because I thought there would be another, and there are. Until suddenly there aren't. We didn't speak for 61 days. I counted them like miles. And somewhere along the way, I understood that the distance wasn't going to close itself. The night before I left, I took out the ring I'd tucked into the deepest corner of a glove box 2 summers back. It's simple. Silver that catches a shy glimmer, nothing showy. I had planned to ask him on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays were ours. Laundry tumbling in the dryer, a pot of chili on the stove, the steady rhythm of a life we built under small lights. But fear is a sneaky thief, and it told me to wait for a perfect moment. I waited so long the moment slid past me, then rushed back like a wave I didn't catch. So I wrote my apology on a scrap of receipt paper, tucked the ring into my jacket pocket against my chest, and told myself that routes can be recalculated, even if you miss a turn. That first stretch of highway unfurled like ribbon, the city buildings giving way to low fields stitched with frost. The radio played a station that still believed in voices you can hum to. Sam Cooke, Dolly, Aretha. The kind of company that sits steady in the passenger seat when the sun is a shy guest. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my heart like an eager dog pressed against the glass, looking toward a horizon I have loved since I was a boy, riding in the back seat of my father's Buick. I kept glancing over at the empty seat beside me, the indentation where Evan's weight would have been. And I felt both small and certain. You ask me what happened. Why, a man who knows the taste of another man's laugh could let him walk out into late summer without following. Well, it is difficult to put pride on trial and not find it guilty. Evan's father got sick and he needed to go back home to New Mexico, to a house with walls that held a past he never fully shared. I wanted to go with him, to cook his father's favorite soup, to walk the little dog, to be in the room when the cardiologist talked about options and the moment hung precarious. But I told him my job couldn't let me take that much time off, which was true, and then I told him maybe it was better if he took some time for himself to think about us, which was not true at all. He asked me plainly if I would wait. I told him yes. Then I didn't call. I told myself I was giving him space, but if I am honest, I was scared of how much I needed him and how much he deserved the kind of loyalty I was frightened I couldn't give without losing some part of myself I still thought I was supposed to protect. So I drove east to west, a stubborn line across the map, like a pen trying to underline a sentence I wished I had said clearly. I choose you. The miles offered their simple theology. Stay between the lines, stop to rest, listen to your engine, pay attention when the gauge leans toward empty. In the rear view, the city shrank into a memory of brick and glass and voices calling to each other on sidewalks. Ahead, nothing but sky making good on its promise to spread open. I stopped at a diner with a neon sign shaped like a coffee cup, steaming in blue and red even in daylight, because some traditions don't buckle under the sun. The waitress had a braid like a rope for pulling stars down, and she called me Hun without asking my name first. The pie case was a stained glass window of options. I reached for pecan because the nuts are messy and sweet and honest. When I said I had a long way to go, she topped off my mug and said, Well then, you'll need more than sugar. You'll need someone to listen. And when I laughed, she said, I'm serious. So I told her, as far as I could in the pauses between her other tables, about a man who made gardens in coffee mugs, about the way he would rescue herbs from the grocery store and nurse them like children until their leaves touched sunlight like it was a hymn. I told her how he went back to be a son and I stayed to be a coward. She patted my hand in a gesture older than either of us and said, You're on the road now, sweetheart. And the road doesn't take cowards where you're going. At the counter, a couple in their 70s shared a crossword and a plate of scrambled eggs, 2 forks crossing like kind swords. The man had a voice that slipped into a tune when the radio hit a familiar chorus, and the woman tapped the formica with a ring so old it had become more skin than jewelry. They were listening without staring, that gracious art, and the woman turned and said, We took a road trip once, 56 years ago. We didn't have half your sense, her husband added. We had love and a radiator that gave up in Tennessee, and we made it anyway. They told me they had learned the same lesson on every trip. Stop when something is beautiful, even if it means you'll be late that night. The hotel was the kind of place you pick because the vacancy sign is a mercy. The carpet had lived a life and the air conditioner had opinions, but the sheets were clean and the front desk clerk slid me a little bag of trail mix like she was sending me into battle. I lay there in the square of light thrown by the street lamp and thought about the first time I touched Evan's wrist. We were in a community garden we didn't yet know we would tend together. He showed me how to gently pinch basil so it grows bushier instead of taller, and our hands touched in that accidental way that tells you everything if you're listening. He asked me then, Do you ever stop to think how somebody's life keeps running next to yours, rich and ordinary, and then suddenly there you are, shoulder to shoulder? I told him I'd try not to think too hard when something good is that simple. He laughed and kept his hand near mine. The next morning, a thin rain pattered the windshield and turned the highway into a cassette tape, unspooling. The wipers kept time like a metronome. I passed a rest stop where a man with a terrier waved to each car like a mayor greeting his town. I pulled in because sometimes what you need isn't complicated. A stretch, a clean sink, a conversation with someone who will hold your gaze steady. The terrier had a little red bandana and a face like a baked good. The man told me the dog's name was Walt, and that they'd been on the road for 3 months, moving just because it felt like something to do after work ended and the house felt too big. He said, You look like you're going somewhere that matters. I said, I hope it still does. He scratched Walt's ears and said, If it matters to you, it matters. People discount that. But it's how the scale tips. In the slow and faithful way America opens up, I left behind the small towns of the Midwest and found myself in the big sky of Oklahoma. The clouds were mashed potatoes and the land a table that could sit everyone you love. I thought of Evan's father, of a living room with blinds that caught dust motes like stars you could touch. I had met him only briefly on a call where he had said, You take care of my boy? And I had said, Yes, sir, like a promise you didn't know was also a test. I don't know what it is to be a parent. But I know what it is to guard something fragile. And I know we all want to be able to look at someone we love and say, aloud, to the nearest courtesy of sky, This one is cared for. If you are listening out there, if you are old enough to have lost things and kind enough to keep letting life hand you new ones, you know the drive becomes a prayer. You measure time in bridges and gas stations and the soft terror of a warning light. You talk to yourself. You sing harmonies you didn't know you knew. And every time the road brings you to a polite halt, construction flag waving, cattle crossing, a stubborn train with all the time in the world, you breathe and remember that some delays are saving you from accidents you'll never know about. That's another kind of grace. On the 3rd day, my car made a sound I didn't like, a high whine that made me wince like I'd been called out by a school teacher. I pulled into a garage with 2 bays and a soda machine that ate quarters, and a man named Eddie who wore a hat with the word Lucky stitched on it as if daring fate to disagree. He listened to the sound and nodded without condescension. I told him where I was going and why. He said, "Then we're not going to waste your time." He tightened a belt and brushed his hands on a rag that had seen it all. "You're good," he said, "but take it easy on the hills. He refused my tip and gave me a bottle of water. "On the house," he said. "We're all in this together." That night, another motel. The bed spread a story written in patterns, the lamp a small lighthouse in a sea of beige. I took the ring from my pocket and placed it on the nightstand in the circle of light, and it caught something, a glint of patience maybe. I said his name lightly, so I wouldn't wake the person trying very hard to sleep in my chest. I thought about the winter Evan and I built a bookshelf and how his laugh came out surprised when the shelf was level. We put our books together in a way that felt like lunging at the future and landing on it squarely. My copy of Steinbeck found his copy of a book about succulents. We argued about whether cookbooks should have their own shelf, and ended up giving them pride of place near the kitchen, because who were we to stand? Between a person and their recipes, forgive me if I keep telling you these things that sound ordinary. The older I get, the more ordinary becomes a holy word. We did not have adventures every day. We had the adventure of deciding what to make for dinner when there were only eggs and a bell pepper and some leftover rice. We had the adventure of disagreeing about whether the rug needed to be replaced and then realizing the fight wasn't about the rug at all, but about whether we were still both holding on to the same end of the rope. We had the adventure of paying bills and being quiet together on Sundays and learning to say, "I'm sorry," not like a sentence you spit, but like a door you open with both hands. I tell you this because when I turned south toward New Mexico, the land changed its shirt and the sky became a cathedral that did not ask for a donation but made me want to be generous anyway. The light out there has a way of telling you secrets. The mesas stacked up like stories, each one a chapter you can read with your eyes. I felt, as the road shouldered me forward, that I was being allowed to do something rare, to change my mind without pretending I had never been wrong in the first place. I stopped in Santa Rosa for a green chili cheeseburger that could have made a grown man cry in a good way. The woman at the counter had a wrist tattoo that said, "Build," and I asked her about it because I have learned to ask. She told me she was rebuilding the old house her grandmother left her, and it was slow work, but it felt like telling a story every day. "What are you building?" she asked, and I had an answer before she finished asking. "A way back to him," I said. She slid the burger toward me and said, "Then you're already halfway there." Night driving in the desert can feel like swimming in air. The stars are as bossy as they've ever been, and the darkness pretends to be threatening until you realize it is carrying you gently. I thought about the first time Evan and I drove at night together, a trip to the coast in a borrowed car that smelled like vanilla. He fell asleep with his head against the window, and I kept turning the volume down when the chorus swelled, as if I could protect his sleep by lowering the world. We reached the ocean just before dawn and watched the water make its endless understatements. He said, "I could live on this edge forever," and I said, "Then let's be the kind of people who don't turn away." When I finally reached the town where he was, where the cottonwoods line the river with their green generosity, where the adobe houses make their own horizons, I parked outside his father's place and let the engine tick itself into silence. The house was small and well-tended, with wind chimes that believed in their own beautiful work. A porch light burned as if I had sent a letter ahead and it had arrived. I sat there, both hands on the wheel, and I rehearsed a sentence that is always either too much or not enough. "I am sorry. I am ready, I am here." I opened the door, and the air met me warm and mild, like a person who has been waiting without hurrying you along. He opened the door before I knocked, which is the kind of thing that only happens when a story wants to be kind. He looked like he always had, and also like someone who had learned new words while I was away. His hair was a little longer, his eyes a shade tired like those of someone who has spent nights practicing how to do hard things. He said my name, and I felt the way I did when I was a boy, and my grandmother called me in from playing as supper cooled on the table. Seen, summoned to a good thing. We stood there for a moment longer than polite. Then he did what he had always done when the world turned tender. He tilted his head and smiled so the right side of his mouth made a small promise. "Hi," he said. This was not a test. It was an opening. "Hi," I said, and then carefully, "I'm sorry I made you do this without me." He stepped aside. The living room smelled like coffee and cumin and something green. There was a honey-colored throw on the sofa and a basket of folded dish towels on the chair like prayer flags that had learned discretion. His father was asleep, a soft snore from the bedroom, and Evan motioned toward the kitchen. At the sink, he washed his hands like a ritual and handed me a towel like an invitation to participate. The kindness of that nearly undid me. We stood there, elbows touching lightly as if reacquainting themselves. And he said, "I wanted to call you every day." I said, "I wanted to call you and didn't, because I was afraid you would hear the worst of me." "The worst of you," he repeated, in that amused way he used when he disagreed with my assessment of myself. "You think I didn't want all of you? Even the scared part?" He took a breath. "My dad asks about you. He likes your voice. Says you sound like you mean things." Tears came with embarrassing efficiency, and I let them. If you ever want to feel that you're allowed to cry, find yourself in a kitchen with a man who loves you and the smell of dinner, and then try not to. He reached for my hand and we stood there. Two men who had lived enough to know that a kitchen is where you fix more than food. "I brought something," I said, and immediately regretted the clumsiness of the timing, like offering dessert in the middle of a sentence. I reached into my jacket and set the small box on the counter. He didn't open it. He put his fingers on the lid gently and then looked at me, fully, the way a person looks at a painting they've visited before and finally sees what everyone else was excited about. "I wondered," he said softly. "I wondered if you would ever stop waiting for perfect." "I don't want perfect." I felt the truth of it like a key turning. "I want practice. I want every day. I want the slow work. I want mess that cleans up with time." He nodded, and it took me one heartbeat to see that nod was for both of us. Then the sound of a throat clearing came from the hallway, and there was his father, in socks and a robe and a face that had made peace with the world a long time ago. "Is that him?" he said, and Evan smiled. "This is him," he said. "This is Sam." I felt something settle into place. The older man approached with the bravery of someone who knows he doesn't need to be brave anymore. He shook my hand like a man shaking loose a bad year. "We've got leftover stew," he announced, as if he had been waiting to make exactly this offering. "You hungry?" I said yes with the gratitude of a pilgrim at a lovely, ordinary shrine. We ate, and the stew was exactly right, all the flavors getting along like they'd worked it out long before we arrived. The conversation slid across topics like bread across gravy. His father told me stories about Evan as a boy, how he rescued a turtle from the middle of the road and carried it like he was smuggling treasure, how he told people to be gentle with their words. I told him about the bookshelf, about the basil, about the rug fight that wasn't about a rug. He laughed and coughed and laughed again, and you could see in Evan's face the relief that lives when someone you love feels more themselves than they did a week ago. Later, after dishes and medicine and a game of gin rummy where I lost with dignity, we sat on the porch. The night was soft as a well-worn t-shirt. The stars were throwing a reunion. The wind chimes told each other secrets politely. Evan put his hand over mine and we watched the house across the street turn off its last light. "I thought about calling," he said. "Every day. I even dialed once and then hung up," I said. I wrote messages and deleted them because they sounded like someone trying to audition for their own life. "Do you want to try now?" he asked. "No audition. Just us." He waited. He has always been good at waiting when it matters. "I'm sorry," I said first, because it was the coin that opened the payphone. I let my fear borrow my voice. I told myself I was being respectful by giving you space, but I was being selfish, protecting my pride. I couldn't stand the idea you might hear the panic in me, that you might decide I wasn't enough to hold this with you. I forgot that love is not an audition. It's a job we both get if we keep showing up. He squeezed. And in that squeeze there was history, hope, and the particular humor of two people who have had a fight with themselves and come out the other side with a better haircut. "I was angry," he said. "I wanted you to come with me. I wanted to ask you again. I didn't because I didn't want to make you choose. And I thought if he doesn't follow the first time, maybe I'm the only one walking. But you're here. You're here." I slid the box toward him like a slow dance. "I don't have a speech," I said. "I have a ring." and a desire to make you coffee in the morning for a long time, and a willingness to buy a rug you like, and the intention to show up when the radiator goes in Tennessee. He laughed and put his forehead against mine. He opened the box, and the ring sat there like something that had been patient on purpose. Yes, he said, which is a word that can be whispered or shouted and still weigh the same. Yes to coffee and rugs and radiator failures and basil and stew and Tuesdays. Yes to the scared parts of you and the scared parts of me. Yes to your voice when you think it might waver. Yes to mine, which will. Yes to building. We didn't put the ring on in a rush, like you do in movies as if the jewelry will run away. We sat with it, and then he slipped it onto his finger and looked at his hand with the reverence you give something you've earned. We sat there a long time, two men lucky enough to have found each other in a world that can be a little careless with tender things. We listened to the chimes and the night and the quiet inside ourselves become a little less bossy. The days that followed were busy. Love is not a vacation from life. We had appointments and pharmacy runs and the comedy of insurance claims. We had mornings where the toast burned and the dog from next door wandered over and made himself the mayor of the kitchen. We had afternoons where his father dozed and we whispered about whether the basil would like the windowsill better than the porch. We used sticky notes like breadcrumbs across the refrigerator, reminders to be kind to our future selves in the late afternoon when patience thins like soup that needs more water. We fell into a rhythm we hadn't had time to practice before, but which felt like a dance our feet secretly knew. On Wednesday, on the way to the clinic, the car made that noise again, the sound like a complaint in a line at the post office. We stopped at a garage with a waiting area that had a basket of crocheted blankets and a puzzle missing 3 pieces. The mechanic's name was June, and she had rough hands that made you believe in her competence. She asked about our day without nosiness. She called me Sir and Evan Sir, and we both smiled at the fairness of it. She tightened the belt that Eddie had tightened and told me hills are a metaphor as much as a grade. "Take them steady," she said. "Don't gun it at the bottom. You'll get there and you won't burn out." I wanted to tell her I would put that on a sampler, but I didn't want to explain the whole internet to a woman who had better things to do. Instead, I asked if there was a good diner nearby, and she gave me directions with the precision of someone who values a good lunch. At the diner, the special was meatloaf, and the pie case did that stained glass thing again, making me feel like reverent congregants had rolled crusts with their best intentions. We ate, and Evan told me about the boy he had been here, how he thought he'd leave and never return, how the sky changed his mind by being relentless and abundant. He told me about the first time he knew he liked boys, how he sat on these same stools and counted the tiles and decided his heart was nobody's shame. He didn't tell his father then. That took time. But when he finally did, his father had said, "How can loving someone make you anything but more?" And they ate carne adobada to celebrate because that's what you do when you decide something big. You let your mouth be as happy as your mind. That night, after everyone slept, I stepped onto the porch alone and dialed my mother's number because I needed to hear a voice that knew me before I had a voice. She picked up on the second ring with the exact little exhale she's made since I left home. I told her where I was and why. She didn't ask why I hadn't called sooner. She said, "Is there soup?" I said, "There is stew." She said, "Good. Make sure you take your vitamins." I laughed like her son, because I am. "Are you happy?" she asked, and I told her that happiness isn't a place I've arrived, but a road I'm glad to be on. She said, "That's all it ever was for me and your father." And I heard the clink of a spoon against a cup and felt how love stretches across geography with no interest in the speed limit. In the morning, Evan and I walked by the river. The cottonwoods tossed coins of light at our feet, and somewhere a child laughed like a bell that gets to be kept. We held hands in that unshowy way that tells the world you are not asking permission anymore. A woman walking her 2 old dogs smiled, and one of the dogs leaned into my leg like a person who had decided we had known each other in another life. It is astonishing how the world becomes kinder when you are not trying to hide in it. We talked about timelines and returns, about whether I could work remotely without pretending that was a perfect solution. We talked about what care looks like when it's not romantic, and we agreed that the unromantic parts are themselves a kind of romance. Evan told me he wanted to plant a garden with his father for the fall. Kale and chard and the kind of onions that make you cry in a way that feels like cleaning. I told him I wanted to build another bookshelf. One that could hold, yes, cookbooks, and the ring he touched my shoulder and said, "We'll need a stronger bracket for poetry." Even in the middle of this sweetness, there were hard moments. Fear does not pack its bags and leave because you ask nicely. There were days when his father's breath came hard and fast and the room felt small. There were nights when I woke and thought of the old apartment, of our couch, of the plant in the corner we joked was a prop because it never died. There were moments when Evan and I looked at each other and saw that we were still learning what it meant to be a team under a different roof with different rules. It was tempting in those moments to do what I'd done before, search for a perfect line and wait to say it. But instead, I put a hand on his back and counted to 6 with his breath. He mirrored me. We made a small tent together in the desert air, and inside it was enough. As days blurred into a gentle routine, as his father's color improved and we laughed more easily, the town began to know me a little. The man at the hardware store nodded like he'd decided I was okay. The librarian asked if I liked mysteries and held one aside without telling me the twist. The barista learned I liked my coffee with a stubborn amount of half and half and slid it across the counter like camaraderie. When I told Evan I had to go back for a few days to wind down a project, he said, "I know." And when I said, "Will you be okay?" he said, "I will be sad and I will be okay because you're coming back." And I believed him the way you believe a weather report from a sky you can see for yourself. On the morning I left for that brief return, his father insisted on walking me to the car. He put his hand on the trunk like you do when you're saying goodbye to both a person and their intention. "You'll be back," he said, not a question, and I said yes. He looked at my face like he could still see the boy I had been somewhere in there. And he said, "What you're doing is good." I said, "It feels that way." He nodded. "Most good things do," he said. Evan stood beside me, and we didn't turn the moment into a theater. We kissed like people who had learned to trust that what is sweet can also be strong. He touched the ring like he was reminding it of its job. Driving away was different this time. The highway did not look like a test. It looked like a ribbon tied at both ends, one here, one there, something that connected places that now had names in my heart. I passed the wind turbines turning their big benevolent faces to the horizon and felt both small and essential, like a bolt holding something together, and that was enough. There are stories where the drama is a thunderclap. Ours is a kind rain that soaks in and makes things grow. People sometimes ask me now how we did it, how we took a silence and turned it back into a conversation, a steady one. I tell them we lowered our voices. We put our hands on the table where the other could see them. We said yes in small ways until the big yes felt like the only way to describe the life we were already living. On the first Tuesday after I got back from that brief return east, Evan pulled out a pot and said, "Chili?" And we laughed because of the symmetry. We did laundry. We put coins in the old machine and watched socks be brave in pairs. We planned the week. We were not exciting to anyone but ourselves, and it was enough. One afternoon, we drove out to a ridge where the view turns your breath into something you want to keep. We brought a sandwich to split, carrots, apples, a thermos of coffee. We talked about the men we were when we first met and the men we were now. We offered them both kindness. "I wish I could tell that version of me not to wait so long," I said. Evan nodded. "Me too," he said. "But also, maybe we needed the waiting to make the yes what it is." We sat there with our knees touching, wind lifting hair and worry. He reached into his pocket and took out a small dried sprig of basil he had pressed in a book the first week we met. "I saved this," he said, "because I thought if we got to this part, I'd want to remember where it started. When the sun dropped, it did it slow, like someone leaving a good porch. They say goodbye. Then they say one more thing. Then they linger in the doorway and tell you a story about someone you both love. And then they wave from the car. The sky kept saying one more thing. We listened and did not interrupt. If you are older or simply wise enough to feel what wisdom feels like when it hums, you know that love is not a victory but a practice. You show up and some days the road gives you a green light all the way through town. And some days every light is red and you are asked to stop and consider your choices. We consider. We adjust. We take the hill steady. When I drove back the second time and pulled into the driveway and saw Evan in the doorway with that considerate smile, I put the car in park and sat for a second to thank whoever listens when you say thank you into the air. Then I opened the door and stepped into the future we had decided on together, the kind of future that looks a whole lot like a present, finally held with both hands. We planted the fall garden. His father told the kale to be brave. We fixed the wonky cabinet with a small wrench and bigger patience. We stacked our books side by side, no more arguments about categories because we had learned we liked the chaos we made provision for. We worked, we rested, we had the kind of friends who come over with 2 pies because they could not decide which one you needed. We put the ring's twin on my finger. Yes, there was one. Because Evan is a thoughtful and surprising person. And we told the story to the people who had been holding space for our ending to bend back into a beginning. The librarian cried. June, the mechanic, said, "About time." The waitress with the rope of a braid cut us an extra slice of pecan and said, "Well now, sugar for the road you're on." Sometimes, when the air goes amber and the day draws its own conclusions, we take a drive not because we have anywhere to be, but because the car is a good place to remember. We roll the windows down. We let the dust write its brief essays, and we do not mind. We hold hands at stop signs. We sing when the radio plays a song that knows our range. We count our blessings like miles, and we do not count so fast we miss the small signs that tell you where you are. We've learned to pull over for the peculiar and the gorgeous, a roadside stand selling watermelon, a field of sunflowers just beyond the fence, a thunderhead building muscles to the west. We stop. We take pictures. We eat watermelon standing up, juice going everywhere, bees minding their business. We laugh because the world is on our side in that moment. And we do not squander it by wishing we were somewhere else. And when people ask, as they always do when they see 2 rings and a habit of standing close, "How did you know?" We look at each other and answer in a way that doesn't make a fuss. We knew when the road got hard and we still wanted to drive it together. We do not say it to brag, but to offer permission. The road is not a test you pass quickly. It is a practice you get to keep. When the engine warns you, pull over. When the view is beautiful, you are obligated, yes, obligated, to stop. When you are wrong, say so. When you are loved, believe it like a person who has decided, finally, that they are allowed to spend kindness on themselves. I keep the old maps in the glove box, not because I need them, but because I like the way they fold the world into pages you can touch. On one of them, in a sharp pencil, I drew a line from the city where I left to the town where I arrived. The highway bending, the tiniest notation for the diner with the pies. A little star for the ridge where the sun told us long goodbyes. I labeled it, plain as you like, road trip to him. I know now that him includes me, too. The person I met on that drive who forgave himself for waiting too long and then stopped waiting. The person who looks in the mirror and sees someone who has learned to take the hills steady, to buy the rugs he will learn to love, to put basil on every windowsill just to see where it is happiest. The person who gets to say his name in a kitchen and know the answer always will be, "Yes, I'm here. This is the story." It has laughter in it, and stew and green chili, and the sound of rain teaching rhythm to windshield wipers. It has an old dog and a new ring and 2 men who chose to be tender on purpose in a world that sometimes forgets. It has Tuesdays. It has a bookshelf. It has a highway where the exit signs spell out the names of people you have not met yet, who will be kind when your car makes a noise. It has a motel where you will place a ring in the circle of a small lamp's light and call that courage. It has a night sky in the desert deceptively gentle, carrying you while you admit your insides aloud. It has a porch with wind chimes that do their job without announcing themselves. A father who asks if there is soup and means love. A mother who tells you to take your vitamins and means the same. And in the center of it, not like a destination, but like a steady station you can always tune to. There is the 2 of us, hands worn and willing, voices finding their harmony over time. We are not perfect. We are practiced. We are exactly where the map always thought we would be. The 2 of us on a road with room for everyone we love. Windows down, The music old enough to be familiar and strong enough to hold a chorus. And the sign up ahead glowing kindly, "Home, next right." We take it, we always will.